Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Lead Library. I would love for you to take your seat so we can get our evening program started. I see a number of seats, prime real estate up here in the front row. If you're looking for a spot to sit down, I am so pleased to see all of you here tonight. I am Michelle Light, the Director of Special Collections and Archives. For 50 years now, Special Collections and Archives at the UNLV libraries has collected, preserved, and provided access to documentation about Southern Nevada. From those photographs and diaries that depict our dusty frontier town at the turn of the 20th century, to the architectural drawings and websites that reveal aspects of the modern strip today, more than 5,000 individuals and organizations have donated their historical records and their stories to us to preserve so we can carry them forward to the future. I hope you all got a chance to see the exhibit downstairs built, as well as the companion exhibit unbuilt over outside of Special Collections. I would like to recognize the curator of the built exhibit, Aaron Mays. There he is. In his exhibit, Aaron has provided a tantalizing glimpse into his work to document Southern Nevada visually. Through his lens, we can start to see some really interesting patterns and themes that emerge in our city's environment. From an archival perspective, Aaron is doing really important work to freeze these curated moments in time to pass on to future generations. His work resonates with us now, but just imagine what people 50 or 100 years from now are going to see and experience through his photographs. Aaron took all of these pictures and thousands more for a project called Building Las Vegas in Special Collections and Archives. Building Las Vegas is a multi-year project to collect oral histories, archives, and photographs about our region's built environment. Las Vegas is a unique city with staggering growth played out against a challenging natural environment. And this growth and development are worthy of study, and we want to make sure that that can happen in the future. So with startup funding from the Tiberti family and generous donations from several others, we've conducted several oral histories and acquired significant historical materials to preserve. We'll next embark on preparing the materials for research and making them available online. So there are several others involved in this project beyond Aaron and me, and I just want to recognize the staff who have participated in Building Las Vegas. We have Stephanie Evans. Wave, Stephanie. Clay T. White. Peter Michelle, and several other staff members. So Special Collections and Archives has been collecting materials about our city's built environment long before this dedicated initiative. And some of that content is featured in the exhibit on this floor called Unbuilt, a testament to the imagination of architecture. So I'd like to recognize Peter Michelle, the curator of the Unbuilt exhibit. He's pulled out some spectacular and sometimes hilarious examples of unrealized ideas for our town. So before I introduce our speaker tonight, I want to call attention to a few more things. We will continue to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Special Collections and Archives with Friday evening events in March and in April. The next event on March 9th will focus on how we help inspire the present, and we'll feature Tom Hawley from Channel 3, UNLV history professor Michael Green, and Jeff Schumacher from the Mob Museum. Each of these speakers have used historical sources from Special Collections and projects that really bring history to life. So you can register now to hear what they have to say. If you're interested in supporting the Building Las Vegas project financially, you can talk to Sue Kim at the table and back. We're also always looking for unique historical records about Las Vegas or for longtime residents to share their oral histories. So if that interests you, let some of our staff know. And finally, Special Collections and Archives is open to the public. So if you want to do research on any aspect of Las Vegas history or any gaming, we would love to see you. We also have thousands of historical materials available online, so you don't even have to leave your house to explore what we have to offer. We like to say in the UNLV libraries that we are your research library. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Lang. Dr. Lang is a professor in the Greenspun College of Urban Affairs and serves as the executive director of the Lindsay Institute and executive director of Brookings Mountain West at UNLV. He is also a senior fellow at Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. He is a nationally recognized expert on urban growth, economic development, and population dynamics, especially relating to the interplay between politics and growth in the American West. He has authored more than 150 publications and developed many new urban planning concepts, such as boom burbs, edgeless cities, and megapolitan areas. His research has been featured in many media outlets like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, CNN, NPR, the list goes on and on. So we are so fortunate to have him here tonight to talk about the Las Vegas urban space, how we got here, and where we're going. Please help me welcome Dr. Lang.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a wonderful exhibit. It's an important exhibit. It depicts a part of Las Vegas that tourists really don't see, that people who live in the region see. And the significance is that there is this other Las Vegas, the less famous Las Vegas, that appears in all those photographs. Now, Las Vegas is a city that's notable for its architecture, especially the Strip. Even in the 60s, as the Strip was still forming, even when it was mostly a sort of auto-dominated boulevard, there's a lot of pedestrian orientation to it now, just by sheer density and the height of the structures necessitates a kind of urban intensification. But as it was under development, people came out from Yale, like Robert Venturi, and did these long essays about how this is the most quintessential American environment and how we should come to understand it because it's so American and it's so significant in terms of defining what especially Sunbelt cities are becoming. And all that's fine and good. It's important to have that. But the other Las Vegas, the Las Vegas in those photos, has its own significance, and I'm mostly going to address that tonight. But just to give you an indication of how famous the Strip is and how it juxtaposes to the routine workaday landscape of the rest of Las Vegas. At my previous university, which was Virginia Tech, we had a facility, this was nice, in Riva San Vital, Switzerland, because it was in an architecture program. So we had to come up with reasons to go to Riva San Vital. So, if you're faculty, the first thing that comes to mind is, I could teach a class. So I came up with some kind of class on the American city that a lot of Europeans took. And I started the class by showing skylines of the US. Some of them I thought were pretty significant, Philly and Boston. The students got none of them. They got New York, a few picked up on Chicago, they knew the Hollywood sign. What they always got was Las Vegas. So that Las Vegas was outsized in that it's a more modest city considering its significance to the international community. And it's fitting because it's a tourist city, it's a global space. But it was always a surprise to me, and their faces lit up. They were always like, yeah, I know what that is. And have you been? No. But I've seen a lot of movies. And it's always showing up in movies. And so what's interesting is that, again, the streetscapes, the master plan build-outs, the workaday Vegas that's in those depictions downstairs and the photographs, if I showed that, I don't think anybody would recognize Sahara. They might recognize the hotel historically, but the street is recognizable to all of us. But the street to a tourist even is, wow, I'm not on the Strip anymore. What am I doing? Where am I going? Honey, we're lost. Where's the GPS? That kind of thing. So it's not the most common street. And the interesting thing is, the way that Strip was depicted in films against the rest of the city. If you go back to Viva Las Vegas in 1964, if Elvis took one wrong turn on the Strip, he was in open desert. And they show a lot of open desert in the film. If you see the film Diamonds Are Forever, they show a nice long extended scene of paradise and the old saucer-shaped, looked like an alien spaceship had landed in Las Vegas. That was our convention center. A little of that's in Viva Las Vegas as well. And then finally, and this is interesting, and I know about this film because I worked on the film tax credits as part of the economic development push for the city. It was a nice symbiosis for us to capture film because it shows our city, it advertises the city. It's also, film production is something that we are specializing increasingly in. So the first film, of course, that applies for the credit is Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. And it's all shot at the Wynn. And apparently it really did well in Asia, even though on Rotten Tomatoes it's quite rotten. And but I'm on a plane once, and I have one of those little things where I've run out of films I've seen, and I'm like, well, I'll just check out this Paul Blart Mall Cop because I know they got some good money and stay in Nevada to make it. And by the way, it doesn't matter if it makes a profit or not. The production is what you capture, and the maintaining the film crews and so on when you do those kind of tax credits. So I didn't care how it did in the box office, but apparently it did okay. And the interesting thing is, at one point they show the setting of Las Vegas. And it is our enormous skyline, our signature skyline. And they used a computer to fill in desert right up next to it. It looks like it's... So, and immediately my first thought is, who's working there? How could you have, 60-story buildings and this enormous urban complex without all the adjacent urban space that would be necessary to provide the employment and services? I'm thinking of this wrong. What it is that Las Vegas that you see downstairs is something that tourists don't even want to give us. In Paul Blart Mall Cop, we're not even entitled to have that because it gets in the way of the narrative of this special whimsical space and the boredom of the Phoenix-like elements, of the Inland Empire type grids, structure out there on Sahara is something that a tourist doesn't need to see. They can get that in their hometown or some variation of it in their hometown if they live in Dallas or they live in Atlanta. And so the sort of idea from the Paul Blart Mall Cop movie is there is just this thing called the Strip. And in the visual mind of most Americans and international tourists, that's what we are. And that part of this city's story has been told over and over. It's in popular culture, it's in books and movies, it's in all kinds of still imagery. It appears again and again. So what I want to turn to now is, well, what about this other Las Vegas? The one we know, the one that we both love and sometimes disdain, depending on our day or traffic or what intersection we're caught at. One key point to start with just about Las Vegas is we are the newest big space in America because it is the only city with 1 million people in the metropolitan area that has its origins in the 20th century, 1905. Every other large urban space in America has an origin point in the 19th century or much earlier, depending on the East and so on. So Las Vegas is of this century we're in and of the last century. And it's mostly of the late last century. So it is something of a unique characteristic to the city. I mean, there was places that nearly match it, and there wasn't much to Orlando until recently. There wasn't much to some places like Phoenix, but Phoenix has a territorial period. Phoenix even has a territorial architecture. There is some older structures in Phoenix that are certainly of 19th century origin. They're now ornamental, but our older structures are mid-century modern. When you're talking our oldest structures are now just eligible for inclusion as historic registered properties with the Department of Interior. Our neighborhoods that are getting qualified for that have crossed the line into that. So the oldest parts of Las Vegas, except for the really old core railroad-driven section of it, are really mid-century and beyond. And we're not even the oldest part of the state of Nevada. We're told that often, by the way. A lot of the northerners are like, well, I'm from real Nevada. You're from, I don't know what that place is. And it's true, Reno, had a half-century head start on this place, or more, because it had some momentum even in the early 20th century. And so it was a much larger physical space than Las Vegas. And in fact, it's one of the rarest cases where, in most states, if you look at Colorado, the original core of urban development at Larimer Square in Denver and downtown, Out of that extension came the rest of the urban complex on the Front Range. The Wasatch Front is the same, the heart of Salt Lake City, the Mormon Temple. Out of that came, central Arizona. What's different in this state was that this is the largest case of urban usurpation of an existing urban environment in another part of the state, hundreds of miles from us, in a totally alien space full of ponderosa pine and hills and the real Nevada, the Cartwrights Nevada, the Bonanza, I'm dating myself here, the Bonanza Nevada. And then this sort of space down here that we're in, that's of a sort of more recent origin. And the difference in the contrasts and the legitimacy and sort of the age and so on are quite stark. There really are parts of northern Nevada where when you're in it, you get a sense that this is of a 19th century origin. So even a more modest metropolitan area, plenty of modern metropolitan areas, that are more modest. Boise has a 19th century heart to it, and so on. We lack that, and when you look at the photo essay downstairs, it's clear that we don't have that, especially not in the angles and the cross sections of the city that are depicted there. And even when Las Vegas became a place, and it has, there's a reputation of did we have to carve this from the desert itself, but remember, the name in Spanish means the meadows. There is no better valley in the Mojave to build in than this one. Here's why. It's water rich. When Elvis was dancing with Anne Margaret, they hadn't touched the lake. It was already significant enough to do a motion picture in the 1960s. Already important enough to have enough visual reference to a viewer that it forms the title of the movie. It's the central element of the movie. And yet we hadn't touched the lake. And the reason is that there's snow up in those mountains still right now. And that mountain range proximate to us and the orographic lift and snowpack in that mountain range forms a mini Colorado that filters down to us. And for years was the basis for our urban civilization. And it was significant to the town's founding because when they did the railroad between Salt Lake City and the port at LA, the kind of cutoff into the interior west and then on to the east, when they did that railroad, this valley was surveyed well as one that you could reliably count on to produce enough well water to put water into a steam engine and not have it explode. And so Las Vegas's origins are because it was a favored space for urban building, for a city. And it was favored because our mountain range is the highest mountain range in an American desert that's wholly within a fully arid region like that. And its snowpack was a singular space for us to access because it came to us. And that gave us the launch as a city. So the whole narrative of Las Vegas is always, can you believe, and you feel this from Paul Mall Cop, there's cactus, and they're not even, by the way, appropriate because they're saguaros, right up. I mean, they must, somehow somebody dropped Las Vegas into the center of Arizona. And, but they don't care because everybody knows there's just cactus out here. There's never anything else. But that was our, that's our, boom, there you are. There you are, Las Vegas. So what I want to do now is I want to go through some of the, I'm assuming many of you toured this lovely exhibit, and I want to comment on the sort of meaning of what is downstairs and its larger, connection to the rest of the West, because it's not an isolated space. And that, again, until we had this period in this city where there were interstates and air travel and air conditioning and all the Sun Belt's emergence, of which we're a part of. Our routine space is a subset. There are elements here from the Intermountain West's larger scaled cities and their grids. There is plenty of elements in the upmarket developments in the fringes, especially south and west in Henderson and Green Valley and in Summerlin, that look like they are literally from the center of Orange County, California, complete with buildings that are not appropriate to the Mojave Desert, despite our forgiving environment that produced the city itself and generated the original core of development. Nonetheless, this is a desert, and we never had a territorial period where we established a form of vernacular architecture that would have matched the environment. And instead, what we did for our upmarket houses for decades is we literally adapted the Mediterranean style, which works in central Orange County or coastal Orange County because it's Mediterranean. It made sense there. It didn't make that much sense here, but that's what we adapted. So we have parts of our city, again, the parts depicted there, that are, of course, local. They're here in Las Vegas. There is some unique elements to them, but they're not different like the Strip is. The Strip is unto itself a separate and distinct and important urban space because it is the largest complex of tourism and live entertainment and conventions and all that in the United States. And nothing else looks like it because it also replicated things like Paris. And now we're in a new phase where city center, I call Chicago, because it reminds me of Chicago inside the loop, that we now at least are in a sort of our own idiom, our own modernism. But yeah, you get the point. We really have a rest of the city as important as it is to us. There are times I think I'm driving around Phoenix, especially the north side of Phoenix, especially in the grid. So one of the most telltale characteristics of a large urban space, and it's true in Salt Lake, it's true in Denver, Phoenix, and so on, in the Mountain West and all the way through to Dallas, until you get to the east really, is that everything is based on large-scale north, south, east, west streets. The whole LA grid, for example, is the largest of its type in the world, really, at that scale. And so most of the workaday Vegas is captured within that grid. There's interiors at 1 mile squares that are quite different and differentiated throughout the grid, but the common, most unique sort of space, the urban space that you see, is that strip. Not just the strip, the Las Vegas Boulevard strip, not just that, sort of notable strip, which is now given over to tall buildings, but the regular strip of low buildings that were built for, paying the taxes on the land before something more intense came along, which never came in many instances, and now it's an auto showroom. The strip that you see out along Sahara. So the most important single piece of the exhibit below is this wonderful block by block depiction. I think it would make a great interactive at some point. Cross-section of the city that is Sahara. And it's an interesting cross-section to choose because, it's like if you do this to an animal, if you dissect an animal in biology, depending on which section you take of the animal, it tells a very different story. And it's true in cities as well. The selection of Sahara is important because the street is, of course, the boundary. It is the southern boundary of the city of Las Vegas. It's where the county and the city meet through a lot of its length. And that wasn't the city's choice. The city wanted to go and annex the Strip when the Strip was under development. And it was clear that the ambition of this industry, of our resort industry, was just too big for those tiny little railroad blocks downtown. It needed to get out there, get out on the land. And that's what it did along the Strip. And when it did it, most of the tax base, most of the energy, most of the economy left the city and entered, as was common in many places, a suburban phase, but the city lost its commerce. It wasn't just housing. So the city said, we'd like to grab that, and they went up to the state legislature. Things did not work out quite well. One, it was a rival city, Reno, and it knew that if this was annexed, Reno's obsession was always, my God, never let Las Vegas get bigger than us. That ship has sailed. But in the 1950s, it was an open question. So and then the county shows up and they're like, that's our strip. So it stops it. And what it means is that Sahara is a street that now forms a southern boundary of a city that could not push its urban space south towards the Strip. In other words, it's a kind of frustrated space because it's a seam. It's almost a space in between. It's between city and suburb. It's between the bulk of the Strip and the downtown. And it's also a place that you never get to the oldest part of the city. So when you do that sort of drive down Sahara, as is shown in the photos below and in that exhibit below, what you see is block by block by block. At the fringes, it's the newer spaces because the way the region works is at its core, it's oldest, and as it goes east and west, and especially west, it gets newer. And newer here means like the 80s or 90s. And yet, the oldest you really get, you never get to that railroad city. Imagine if you had taken, Fremont as the axis, or Ogden, or one of these other older streets that clearly entered downtown, and suddenly you're in a space that's recognizable vintage of the early 20th century. You actually never do that on Sahara. What you never get to is, even at the heart of it, at Las Vegas Boulevard, Sahara never really gets to a point where you're like, okay, I'm in the city now. You're always at a point of, this is a blend of more intense development than is characteristic of much of suburbia, however, never reaches a kind of development crescendo necessary to establish pedestrian orientation or any semblance of a recognizable city that would reflect not even just the cities of the East, forget those, but downtown Phoenix. There isn't even a downtown Phoenix. There's not a downtown Salt Lake in that. There's certainly not a downtown Denver. There's not a downtown Reno in that. And again, it's that this is a street that literally was built by, for, and of the auto. In fact, I look downstairs, almost every shot has an automobile in it. It's fitting that there's a whole auto showroom extended, from the 15 all the way west, practically to the master plan community developments at the fringe of Sahara. You have, one car dealer after another. And it's always been that's the strip to the strip. In other words, Sahara's been what they call in other places the Miracle Mile, the large-scale arterial commercial space that was, again, never built for anything but an automobile. And it's also part of this grid, and the grid is rugged utility, so that when you're on Sahara, you're never thinking, wow, this is a rather idyllic space. Perhaps a median parkway would serve a function here, Now, that is the story of the other part of the illustrations that are downstairs. So most of what you see that is yet to be built is master plan community development. So in most big cities like LA, there is the grid, and then they've developed the Hollywood Hills, and they've developed Palos Verdes, or in Orange County, the northern parts of Orange County, Anaheim and Santa Ana are in the grid. Even Disney's in the grid. Disney's in a section of the grid. And then when you get to Anaheim Hills, or when you get to central Orange County, even though it's flat in many cases, it's been turned into this sort of hill and dale affair around places like, especially the Irvine Ranch, and the conversion of that into large-scale master plan community development. Remember, we are more Californian than we are anything else here. We do analysis on politics at Brookings, and we've looked at voter eligibility in this county. And only 1 in 10 people in this county were born in Nevada, but a third were born in California. And so, as a reflection of political preference, or even just habits and tastes and accent and things like that, this is more a part of California than it is the rest of Nevada, hence the alienation from parts of the state that are more Western, let's just say, than we are in orientation. And so it's not unusual to find that the symbols of California, the In-N-Out burgers, the space, including our, as I said, master plan community developments that seem to come of whole cloth from Orange County, are a reflection of that. Another important significance is this, that when you have the grid, you have a space that is for utility. In other words, the success of a grid is that if somebody comes to your city, and this starts with places like New York and Philadelphia, not Boston's downtown from the beginning, or Washington, which is a ceremonial city, it was thought that wouldn't it be convenient to a visitor doing business if you had nothing but north, south, east, west streets in regular pattern? And so that is a city whose whole purpose is for utility. Now, in the case of New York City, at one point in the mid-19th century, they realized this whole damn thing is going to get paved over. And they stopped and they said, let's do Central Park. Now, most tourists who see Central Park think, and Central Park is connected to our master plan communities, I'll make the point. When they see Central Park, they think, wow, somebody just put a nice little boundary around a rectangle in the middle of Manhattan. Isn't that nice? That's what Manhattan would look like if you just put a rectangle there. No, that's not what Manhattan looks like at all. The creator of that park, the famous Frederick Law Olmsted, sampled New York State in the Adirondacks and the Catskills and dragged down scenes out of those spaces and put them in Central Park as the antidote to the city. He said, Central Park can't be a formal garden like they have in, France, and it can't be just a regular old section of Manhattan that we cordon off and prevent building in. We have made Manhattan so industrial, so profane, so given to man, that we have to establish a core of nature and the sacred as the antidote back into the middle of Manhattan, and thus the scenes, the lakes and so on. It's like, wow, what a nice, thank God they saved this piece of Manhattan. No, it didn't look anything like that. It was failed farms and stuff. They made this happen. And thus, Olmsted did master plan communities originally in Orange, New Jersey, in Llewellyn Park, that were all about the curves. So what you see is all the new stuff has curves. All the old stuff is a grid. So the places that are growing south and west, which are the most affluent section of the region, in Summerlin and Henderson, are mostly built off nice little curves. And you see that in all the things that are yet to be built. And I know that Paseo Verde is going to appear in a future set of illustrations and photos in, streets that have all of that. Like, for example, even Green Valley Parkway, is different than Pecos. It has this slight turn to it. And the reason is, in master plan community logic, nature has curves. And if nature doesn't have enough curves, put more curves in. Because the curves are the antidote to the grid. And every city with the grid has the curves. Every place has a North Scottsdale when it's got Scottsdale. It's got some section of it now that is, like New York from the 19th century, a reflection of a different building pattern. And they tend to be, at this point, in cities like Las Vegas, where the action is, up in those hills. So the hills that we've done, people are like, my God, you're scarring those hills. Look, what they did in San Francisco, what was that? They took a grid and put it right over a mountain. The reason San Francisco is the funkiest place to drive in a taxi cab and it's like heart-throbbing scary, is they make a turn and they didn't terrace the street. It's just down. Because this was the idea of San Francisco. Need a city fast, there's a lot of gold in there. Here's the plan, grid, put it down there. There's a mountain in the way. So what? Well, it's gonna be kind of freaky, isn't it? We'll put all the transit on cables and pull it up hills. Okay, and that's San Francisco. Nobody does that anymore. If you propose that, imagine trying to get that through the development review process, we're gonna just, they're not plowing the mountains over. They're faking it when they dig up too much and there's caliche showing. They repainted black so it looks volcanic, like the hills, the McCullough Range is volcanic. So look, it's authentic, even if it's painted. It was black when we tore it out of the earth, but we're working off the palette, off the material up in the hills. And so, to wrap this up, I see the time getting short. There are actually 3 separate regions that we live in. The most significant one, because it's at the heart of our industry, it's the way we export to the world through our tourism. It's what we're known for. It's the reason we're getting a football team. It's why we have arenas, is the Strip. And nothing else needs to be said on that, because somebody has probably in another university not related to us working on a Strip exhibit right now. We almost don't have to depict the Strip in that regard. And then there's this other 2 spaces. The first space is the dominant space, the Maryland Parkway where the university is. One of the things I think about often is, what if UNLV were in Summerlin? Would it be in its identity as a university? Would it be the sort of regular urban university that it is? It's a diverse university. Would it have a kind of toniness to it because it was in a physical setting that was different? But the history is that it winds up as part of the grid. It's in, of course, this town called Paradise that we're in right now. We're, of course, not in Las Vegas. And that is, maybe 3/4 of the region outside the Strip is in that form. And then there's the third Las Vegas, which is all of the stuff designed starting in the 60s and 70s and then executed in the 80s, 90s, and continues full execution today. And it's the difference between, one of the depictions they may do in the future is a look at Eastern Ave. And if anybody lives at the toppy top of Eastern Ave, it's all curvy. And then, boom, you're in the grid. And there's a whole different feel. There's a kind of smile that comes on people's faces as far as the physical setting, the relief that you get when you clear the commercial district, and all of a sudden you see those fountains as you enter Anthem, and you realize you're in this different space. You're in a space that people live in, where commerce doesn't exist. If it does, it's folded into the suburban fabric in a way to where it's unobtrusive, where it doesn't shock, where it's not the Strip. Nobody's going to build Sahara up there. That belongs back in the valley, back in the grid. And so what's nice about this exhibit is that of the 3 Las Vegases, it takes the 2, the workaday Las Vegas of the grid and the master plan, successful master plan, large-scale development of the south and western parts of the region, and puts them all together that's visible. So now, for the first time, because of this exhibit, I think we have the full picture of what Las Vegas is. It is this strip that is one of a kind. It is a little bit of Phoenix, and it's a whole lot of Orange County up in those hills. And the whole thing hangs together because all of those elements are necessary in terms of where people choose to live, where they need to live, where the utility of the city lies. And the nice thing is that this university is really the one that has to tell that story. This library and this special collections, this special collections archive has to be the one to tell that story, because nobody is going to tell the stories of the workaday and master plan Las Vegas. And yet, in terms of our lived experience within the city, they are more significant than the Strip, in that I know a whole category of person living in this valley whose life is to avoid the very thing which makes the region notable. Thank you. Here, you want to take this?
Are you good? Thank you, Robert. So we have 15 minutes for questions and answers. So I will bring a mic around that works. Is there anyone who has any questions for Robert?
Hello. We just moved into Paradise Palms, which is near here, yes. And a lot of them are so proud to be in that area of central Las Vegas and the history of Las Vegas, but we see so much growth out to the outer skirts of Las Vegas. Do you see the growth continuing, or do you see a kind of embrace of the central part of the valley?
I see both. And a lot of regions have both. So where you are is one of the neighborhoods that would qualify for registration under, of historic places for the Department of Interior. I live, by the way, before I moved here, I lived in a place called Holland Hills, which is now registered as a mid-century modern neighborhood. So it's second. Arapahoe Acres in Denver was the first, and Holland Hills is the second. I had a flat roof house, Bauhaus house in Virginia. I wouldn't recommend it. Rains a lot. Rains a lot in Virginia. And so I understand the attraction of those structures. And what's nice is, for starts, those areas are reviving. And if we do light rail through the city, that light rail boulevard would be one of the nicest ones to depict, because it would be the additional complexity added to the city, because it would produce a much denser corridor that was still, distinctly southwestern and lower intensity, but built around the accessibility and pedestrian orientation of the rail. And so anything that reinforces that, by the way, preserves the fringe of the valley, puts a little less pressure on the BLM land. The other thing is that modernism has won. They're not doing the Mediterranean stuff anymore. Most of the upmarket housing has switched to a form of architecture that is desert modern. So if you look at most price points, they're blown up versions of what were once modest mid-century homes, out in the hills. And the good news there is that for the sake of energy conservation, for environmental impact, because of the way you could design the architecture to be much greener, because you can put all these wide eaves out there, and you don't have to put glass in these giant. So one of the characteristics of Mediterranean is these enormous central spaces with Palladian windows that somehow mysteriously always face southwest. And I built a modern house here, because one of the things I thought is, if I come out here, I'd like to do that. And while they were building my house, they rented me a house. That's the nature of the real estate market at the time I came. I'll give you the date, 2010. You do the math. And I paid a bill on air conditioning that was the most shocking single bill that was ever. I wasn't even that cool. And it was because this thing was crazy. What was this thing? And then I moved into a house bigger than it, with 11 sliding glass doors that shotgun off a pool. And the next thing you know, I don't even need my air conditioning till June. So the good news is, not only is respect being shown to those interior neighborhoods, not only are they reviving, not only should we reinforce their revival by adding infrastructure and adding revitalization efforts that make them more attractive, and and allow them to connect to the rest of the community without an automobile, and use that as a competitive advantage, because there's such a market for that. We're one of the largest cities that doesn't have much housing in that category. Those buildings in their larger scales have influenced and have improved radically both the sustainability and the aesthetic of much of the master plan development.
Anybody else?
Can you give us your views on the impact of the Raiders in the stadium and expand that maybe to see your views on transportation alternatives that will probably be necessary?
Well, full disclosure, I worked on the stadium. And the reason is this. You know, Brookings is interesting in that the Brookings Institution back in Washington, D.C. is notable for saying every stadium is a scam. However, there are two cities where the stadiums work, Orlando and Las Vegas. Here's why. In most other places, after you've built an airplane factory, then they build a stadium for your entertainment. The stadium is that is our airport. That is our airplane factory, rather. That's what we export. So the majority of people, and Orlando knew this ahead of us, by the way. Orlando never had a problem understanding this concept, which is that they used tourism taxes, like live entertainment taxes. At one point, they came after our rodeo. They were going to take our rodeo. The reason they didn't get it is when they did the math, transporting all the animals from the west where rodeos happen to some bizarre corner of the southeastern United States, which is Orlando, and the animals are the stars of that whole thing. I mean, you know. But they had a business model where they were going to capture the live entertainment taxes, plow it back into the facility. We weren't doing that. So when people talk about, I'm going to be taxed for this. Well, if you don't stay in a hotel, you're not taxed for it. And it's a use of the taxation that in Orlando, there's only 3 uses of their taxes for a hotel. It either is advertising for Orlando, the convention center, or they build stadiums from it. So that model actually replicated Orlando, and Orlando has the same model we have, which is they can justify it because the majority of individuals who are in attendance, I went to see the Pittsburgh Penguins play our beloved Knights, and we won. It was cool. Thank you, Tom, by the way, for inviting me to that. Sitting over there and putting you on the spot. And yet I saw more Pittsburgh fans. And there's always going to be more fans from the other cities. So the peculiarity of the region is our chief export is consumption. So in Phoenix, when they moved the stadium from Tempe to Glendale, or they moved it in Texas in Dallas from Irving, Texas to Arlington, Texas, big whoop. It's like moving around deck chairs. Here, not having that meant we forfeited types of entertainment which connect to the rest of the industry. If somebody comes to our city for one of those games, and believe me, they're going to start looking, everybody who wants to travel with a team will go, when's it in Vegas? When's it in Vegas? Honey, let's go to Vegas. Let's do that. Let's combine it with Vegas. And when they come and spend the rest of the money associated with that, it's nothing but stimulative. And finally, the virtue of that stadium is it will cause an immense crisis in the transportation network. While I was promoting the stadium, I notably fought the idea of an elevated expressway, and I took some heat for that. I had a lot of editorials in the paper. I pretty much whined and complained in a way that only an academic can do. And so it was very precise whining, but it was whining nonetheless. And the good news is that stadium is going to need transit. And the Raiders are even signaling a willingness to it. And then when Amazon comes and looks at the city and says things like, not only do you not have transit, you're considering an elevated, expressway from the 1950s. Robert Moses has been reanimated and lives in Las Vegas. So all of that means that when you look at the most important intersection in the whole state of Nevada is Trop and Las Vegas Boulevard. It's so many lanes right now. It's to the 0 lot lines of the space that's private. It cannot go any further. The only way to reduce congestion would be to create an alternative transit that takes people and packs them into tight little spaces and moves them through it. When people are in cars, they're wrapped in seas of metal. If you've ever seen the depictions of a street with everybody in a car versus everybody walking versus everybody on transit, there's a practical reason for it. So my hope is that the stadium is kind of shock therapy for the transit system. One should run up Maryland Parkway as a sort of new age light rail, or a next generation streetcar, which is lighter than light rail. But some form of transit. I mean, we've got the largest hotel zone and an airport that on the way they rank these things is second in power after LAX. And the way they rank them, the best way to rank them is they don't just fly to their grandma's house in Schenectady or something like that. They don't just fly from Atlanta. Everything goes through Atlanta in the southeast. They're not just going somewhere in, rural Georgia. They get out. They leave the airport. So we're number 2 in people that say, actually, this is mine. I hope you enjoy whatever destination you're going to. I've flown in and people are like, yeah, what do you think I'm going? You know, when they say that at the end. Now in Atlanta, that means something. You're probably not going to Atlanta. There's people I've met that said, I've actually never been in Denver. Oh no, I've been in Denver, but I've never been in Denver. And I've been in Atlanta, but I've not been. Nobody ever says, yeah, what I did is I thought it was at the airport in Las Vegas. Everybody gets out. That means that all those people have to go. All of them come in for these conventions, and they're all going to one rather discrete space. They're not going to Workaday Las Vegas. They're not going to Master Plan Las Vegas. They're going to one place, the place that everybody knows where they're going to, and we haven't built this capacity. It is an amazing situation for reasons that I need not to go into here, but I think, you know, the fact that the city hasn't done it is notable, and the fact that it could translate that opportunity into something that's quite successful and almost sustainable by the way it pays its fares is a real opportunity. So the stadium, yeah, counterintuitively, I kind of like the stadium. All right, there's more hands going up.
Excuse me. Yeah, I've been here long enough to remember when we created a city called the Lakes in order to house Citibank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you reconcile that with our history? Because nobody ever talks about that. That was pretty traumatic at the time.
Well, that was significant because it was an early effort at diversification of the regional economy. So, you know, getting Citibank was, you know, an important signal. You know, people don't realize that we have a rather robust business service sector. For example, that when we were looking at Amazon, one of the things we could say is we have about the amount of business services that you'd predict for a city our size. We don't have that in manufacturing. We don't have that in other things. So it was important also, I mean, you know, it was a picturesque suburb. However, it was a model that I think isn't sustainable because it creates surface water that's not deployed for use in anything other than aesthetic. And as a result, I don't think we've got a lot of opportunity to do that. That doesn't fit where the city is right now, but it's not insignificant because it's a stage along the path to the kinds of master plan communities you see now.
So in the resort corridor, there are two anomalies, at least, that existed over a period of time. There's this high-rise country club towers and Turnberry Place, and you know why? Why there, and what caused that to be? And they don't seem to be going anywhere else. That
yeah, I mean there is an actual sub-market, and it goes up and down for high-rise, mostly non-permanent resident housing in the city. And that's not unlike some other submarkets that you see in Miami and places that are warm in winter and attract people who are trying to escape, you know, like a day like today. I can't believe we're all inside. What are we doing? We should be out there. So, yeah, that's something you see in places that have that attraction. However, what's interesting is that, you know, you see those in other places and they tend to stick out as you know, Scottsdale has, I mean, Tempe's got one of these high rises right in downtown Tempe now. It's got a little bit of a skyline Tempe. Here, those are like, everybody just assumes anything that goes above like 8 stories is a hotel. So it's sort of, in terms of what it represents by the visual, it just looks like another hotel. And there are hotels that have been blended with condos and so on. And I think, and timeshares of some variation. So what all this is that Las Vegas has a tremendous demand for housing that is beyond that of the duration of a typical hotel stay, but is shorter than that of a permanent resident. And those kinds of buildings tend to capture that. And that's why some of them are there. They're not dominant, and you don't see them out in the master plan community developments. One more question, maybe? Back there? Oh.
This question is perhaps more for Aaron.
Sure.
I'm curious what the next stage of this project may be.
Go ahead.
The exhibit downstairs documents the grid along Sahara as well as the curvy, carved-out Ascaya development, and I'm curious where the next phase of this project might focus upon.
Sure, thank you. Robert has talked about it a couple of times. Eastern Avenue, if you drive along there over the next 6 months, you're going to see this homeless-looking guy out there with a camera. Just honk and wave, and I'll go, yeah, whatever. Because that's next. I have a couple spots in Sahara I need to kind of infill a little bit to complete that out. But Eastern is going to start from, I think I'm going to start in the North Las Vegas side. or I'm sorry, the North Las Vegas Town Center side, where it's Civic Center, and then work my way out, because by the time I get out there, they're going to have built another 5 miles out. So that's next as far as what street I'm going to go. And I have like a laundry list of other little places, but this is halfway for my collecting as part of this initiative. So I'm hoping that this event and this exhibit will give me other ideas that people will come and say, hey, have you taken a look at this? And it will expand the overall collection.
I think
One more?
one more question back there. Anyway, just a minute or two past 7.
Just had a question. You were talking about cars and traffic congestion and things like this. For years, I've thought about what a subway would do in this town, whether it's geologically possible. You get out of the heat in the summertime, and I've traveled a little, my wife and I have traveled a little in Europe, and those subways, especially in London, they're just spectacular. And I don't know if that's something that could happen here. If it could, how would that be advantageous to reduce the congestion and maybe help with sprawl in the community?
Yeah, in London, they're opening a 73 new mile long stretch of subway, which is stunning when you consider. There are parts of the United States that desperately need new infrastructure like that, like a tunnel under New York, under the Hudson River between New York and New Jersey. The tunnel that links the rail system right now is over 100 years old. They were taken off the books recently. So there's not a lot of digging going on for transit in the United States. And I worked on a project when I was at Virginia Tech to bring the subway all the way out, the metro all the way out to Tyson's Corner. And we wanted to drop it underground at Tyson's Corner, which justified because it was a high-density office development. And the VDOT still pushed back on that, and the thing's elevated through it. It's bunkered through one section. So it's just tremendous. And we found this Dutch company that slowly grinds away through the nice marine soil of Virginia and would have dug it cheap. Here, you need to blast. Here, it would be amazingly disruptive. Underneath the strip, too, is an enormous corridor of plumbing and wiring, and wow. I mean, it would be. So I'd be happy just to get, a surface structure as, you see in places like Denver or Phoenix or Salt Lake or Portland, and I could stay here till like 8 o'clock listing off everywhere else that has that and has it to the airport. So yeah, it's a matter of cost prohibition. There could be sections of it, though. The interesting thing is there could be a non-station tunnel as you come out of the airport. There's parts of it that should be bunkered because of flight path and things like that. So there might be a point or two where you actually drop into a space, or you're more likely to be in a kind of terrain where it's lowered from street elevation and somewhat sunken, but you just can't justify it. When you do the math of a subway, it's amazing. When you do per mile of light rail, and especially a streetcar up Maryland, it's not that different than bus rapid transit. And over the duration of the project, it's much better off in terms of capital costs and equipment loss and all the rest of that than bus rapid transit. So I'd be surprised if we get, anything beyond the lightest of light rail. I don't think we're ever going to have, for example, the Denver train out to the airport. Denver built its airport in Kansas. They need a real hauling, moving, heavy rail out there. The good news for us is we can have this generation of rail where you don't even need the overhead structures anymore. It just grabs the current from the track without electrocuting people and dogs and others on the way, like a third rail. We could have the least obtrusive, least, just thread right through the environment where people, one of the challenges is just not striking it with your automobile because it's going to be right out there in the street. So Portland has two types of systems. It has a streetcar in downtown that's on a little loop, and then a rail out to the airport. If we had those two levels of rail that Portland has, and we're not even what Salt Lake's got, a serious train up to Ogden and Provo. We don't need that. We don't need the Denver train. We need light and sometimes lightest rail. Thank you.
Okay. So we've got, that ends our formal presentation here today. We do have a few things for you guys. Today is the opening of all the art spaces on campus. Most notably, Barrack Museum, which is in the building directly across here, has a very large art exhibit that is open. It is open until 9 o'clock, and I understand they ordered a little extra cheese and wine. So if you'd like a little more, mosey on over there. It's a great little exhibit over there. A little different than what we have here, so just enjoy. Is there, okay. Don't laugh. Okay. So I have five thank yous. So the first I have to start with is Robert for doing this. So Robert's kind of my intellectual backing for this, as you can tell. And I sit in front of him and he talks for about an hour. My brain hurts, and then I leave off, and I have this unbelievable understanding of things that I've never really looked at. I was born here, and kind of this city grew up around me a bit. So there's a lot of things that are very, very normal to me that Robert's kind of pointed out and said, not so normal, guys. And that other places find fascinating. So as I'm building this collection, as I'm looking at different things, I always get such great information from Robert. So I really want to thank him both for tonight and for that. So I have a couple things for him. Can you hold that for a second? A couple prints for the office.
Oh, nice.
Okay, number two is no event ever comes together without the staff. Guys, you're all standing back there hiding and stuff. I'm not going to point you out, but you know who you are, and thank you. I know I've been a pain, and I'm really sorry, but I really do appreciate you guys. I really do. Thank you. Kind of got to give a shout out to Tiberti Fence. They kind of rocked it. I was kind of hoping that maybe they had some stuff that would just fall off the back of a truck and I could bring down here, because the exhibit space was not designed as an exhibit space. It's designed as kind of like a place for a couple tables and chairs. And I really honestly, I think what it was designed for is that the architect wanted to put a podium up there so he could stand there and go, I am good. So to put an exhibit in that space was impossible. I couldn't have walls. I can't have anything permanent. There are no lights. So I went to Tiberti, and Ronaldo Tiberti and Mark Maffey, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. They were just awesome. So I really had to just kind of publicly thank them. I also wanted to thank Maggie Farrell, who's our new dean, and she is she's flying somewhere right now to be at a conference. But I just want to thank her for when she heard the idea that we were going to bring fence into her, I mean, she came in like her first meeting, right, brand new dean. Her first meeting was, yeah, we're going to put fence down here and we're going to have an art exhibit at it. And she was like, okay. And I think somebody told her that it was going to be barbed wire. So I just want to publicly thank her for not, axing the whole idea. And I think she's pleased with it. Michelle, thank you so much for putting up with me. I'm just going to, that's just it. And I also want to thank, many of you know Patty Iannuzzi, who's in the back here. Patty is an amazing person in my life. And there's actually a lot of people here. The first person that I ever watched bring, make a photograph come up in water, and that really kind of like scratched the surface for me is sitting right over here, Dave. My former supervisor here, Jerry, is sitting in the back wincing now because she's afraid that everybody's going to turn around and look at her, which we all should do. These people have been very instrumental, and there's a lot of other people, a lot of photographers here, and they've all been very instrumental in just kind of keeping me going. But I really want to point out Patty, because Patty brought me here from Photo Services, which is next door, and she had an idea that I had a hard time seeing. It took her about 5 years of hey, Aaron, by the way, and finally it was like she had put it all together, and walking through that, now that it's done down there, I see the vision that you had, and it's you. Thank you. And so lastly, I just mentioned there are a lot of photographers in here tonight, and you guys, they tend to all sit over here in a group, because that's what they do. But they can tell you that really good photography doesn't happen between 9 and 5. It happens in the after hours. It happens all the times that are not convenient. And so, As I grab a camera bag and I run out the door every time to go do this, there's one person that I'm leaving, and I just want her to know that I'm not so excited to be leaving you all the time. So that's my wife, Sylvia. Thank you. So that's it. We have the unbuilt exhibit. Peter Michelle's going to be back over here, third floor, right on around the whole big atrium. If you have any questions, please definitely check it out. And then I'll be back downstairs in the gallery for anybody that has any questions. I think, Robert, are you going to stick around for a little bit too? So please, and enjoy yourselves. And then, of course, we have Barrick across the quad a little bit there too. Thank you all for coming.